there. I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our session today. The topic is demystifying the security data fabric and its benefits for compliance, cybersecurity, and GRC teams. Joining me today is Robin Das. He's Executive Director, Market Growth Strategy with DataBee, a Comcast company. Now, before I bring Robin on the screen, a little bit of background on our session. Security and compliance leaders face a growing challenge. Too many tools, fragmented data, and limited clarity. Siloed telemetry and inconsistent visibility slow decision-making and weaken control effectiveness. This webinar shows how a unified security data fabric can consolidate, normalize, and enrich data so teams can act with confidence and precision. You will hear how DataBee's approach enables continuous controls monitoring, accelerates vulnerability remediation, and strengthens executive reporting. You'll learn how aligning security, risk, and compliance data creates a more proactive, resilient, and audit-ready organization. First, a bit about my organization. Information Security Media Group is a global education and intelligence firm. We're based in the U.S. in Princeton, New Jersey, and you may know us by any number of our 38 media properties. These include Bank Info Security, Data Breach Today, and AItoday.io. In all, we serve an audience of over 1.8 million security and technology leaders globally, and we give them a daily diet of news, analysis, research, events, and educational programs just like this one. Just a few notes of housekeeping. If you have any questions for Robin, you can submit them anytime via the chat window on your screen. I may not get to every one of your questions, but for every question we don't answer today, we'll get a response back to you via email. Should you encounter any technical issues while viewing today's webinar, take down that email address on your screen. If you write to webinars at ismg.io, we have got support staff standing by to help. And a reminder, today's webinar is copyrighted material meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. If you would like to use any of the information presented today, or if you're looking for customized training materials, please contact us. Thrilled to introduce our sponsor today, DataBee. DataBee, a Comcast company, offers the DataBee Security, Risk, and Compliance Data Fabric platform and DataBee Blue Vector, an on-premises network detection and response platform to some of the world's large enterprises and federal agencies. They help their customers work smarter with an evidence-centric approach to compliance and security that prepares them for what's next. Developed and proven at scale, DataBee delivers connected compliance and security data, insights, and dashboards that can work for everyone in an organization. Built to protect critical government and enterprise networks, DataBee Blue Vector delivers AI-powered NDR for visibility across network, devices, users, files, and data to discover and hunt skilled and motivated threats. To learn more, visit databee.ai. And it's my privilege to welcome back to our studio here, Robin Das, Executive Director, Market Growth Strategy for DataBee. This is a new cybersecurity business unit developing and bringing to market a security, risk, and compliance data fabric platform and a network detection and response platform, both designed for large enterprise and critical infrastructure organizations. In his role, Robin is responsible for defining DataBee's unique value proposition in the market, long-term strategy and product vision, and business development opportunities. With that, welcome to the virtual stage, Robin Das. Robin, pleasure to see you again.
It's great to be here, Tom.
I want to back up a bit and refresh our audience's memories from the conversations you and I have had. Why today do we need a security data fabric?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and great to sort of get back into it. I think the first thing is just the amount of data and tools that the enterprise security stack has. There's just so much that's coming at you that no single, the tools themselves probably have their own very robust dashboards that do reporting for just that tool. But the real benefit of a security data fabric is the ability to kind of tie all that insight together, tie all that data together, and stream it, into one sort of single source of truth that enables sort of a multitude of different outcomes. One that we find particularly that resonates with our clients is around compliance and the whole notion of continuous controls monitoring, but there are other things as well, like sort of security threats and that type of stuff.
Well, let's talk about that because just earlier today, I had a conversation with another vendor talking about their security fabric, which is their security platform. In your context, what is the security data fabric?
Yeah, I mean, for us, that we think we align to best practices, and the way that DataBee does it sort of starts off with a series of different steps. So the first one I think we start off with is ingest, and so for us, we have about 300 data feeds. And it's interesting. Sometimes we meet with clients, and they're like, "Well, do you have our data feed?" So chances are, yes, we already have the data feed, and if they don't, it sort of takes us typically about 2 weeks to like onboard this data feed, and we haven't yet found a data feed we couldn't handle. So first of all, it starts with ingest, and so we take sort of and I think a good data fabric will be able to take not just security data but also business context, things like organizational charts, and that type of thing. And so we sort of pull that data in. And then the next comes the streaming portion of that. And so that's where we sort of transform that data. So we have the mapping files and we sort of transform it. And one of the reasons we're actually able to onboard data sources so quickly is we transform it to a standardized schema called the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework, or OCSF. So this isn't our particular schema. This is a neutral sort of open source schema that a lot of different security vendors adhere to. And so that really sort of makes it, the data is both portable and sort of available to, not just us, but different people within the organization. And then we sort of do the preparation. And for us, I think this is where the magic happens. So we have this patent pending piece of technology called entity resolution. And this is the ability to stitch together from all these different data sources, sort of a coherent sort of whole. So if I think about myself, I have things like sort of an email address, an employee ID number, maybe an NT login. And so what the entity resolution does is it takes all that different data that will exist in all that different systems and sort of pull that together and sort of create a notion of me as a sort of single identity, regardless of whether we're talking about my email address or my employee ID number or my NT login. And so that to us is really sort of an interesting piece of it. And then, because as that data comes in, we can ask interesting questions like, have we seen this sort of user login before? And if so, we sort of have this ability to kind of then, again, tie it back to me and create like this whole timeline of events and activities that I have around me as an entity versus me as a user ID or me as an email address. And we think that's really, really powerful because when you think about when you think about all the different activities, all the different tools, all the different types of data, it really helps build up this coherent picture, and actually then helps analysts, instead of having to pivot and transform the data after the event, or trying to do this down as it comes in real time as the data is being created. As we do it up front, it kind of makes life easier down the road.
Well, let me ask you to take a step back and then take a dive deeper. Taking a step back, I know this came out of a business challenge you had at Comcast, and you developed a solution that became DataBee. What are the strategic goals of the security data fabric? In other words, what problem did you solve?
Yeah. Sorry, this is a great question. So the biggest problem I think for us at Comcast was too many different data sources producing too much data in too many different formats. And it was very hard to achieve both compliance outcomes and security outcomes because it was very hard to get the reporting into a single source of truth. The analysts were having to reach into all these tools in order to kind of prove out compliance to key frameworks. And so by adhering to this security data fabric approach, we were able to stream all the data in a continuous fashion. So the data is always there. That suddenly means that for your compliance and your auditors, they have an easy access dashboard, and they can see in real time the compliance posture of the organization. And so that was for us one of the key challenges, is our sort of ability to kind of get a real-time view of your compliance and your compliance posture. And then secondly, once you have that real-time view, you can then make changes to it because you can see, a feedback loop in sort of real time instead of having to wait once a year or once a quarter to see how your compliance programs are doing.
That's the step back. Now we're going to take a deeper dive. Talk about how a unified security data fabric can help improve visibility and decision making across an enterprise's teams.
Yeah, that's a great question. So by having all of that data and also by aligning it to organizational structure, you can begin to kind of create some hierarchies. And so you can really make compliance a team sport across the organization. What do I mean by that? Well, you know, the sort of, I think all compliance is local. And so if you look at the person that can enact the change, it's the manager or like the VP versus sort of some unnamed auditor sitting off in an airless room somewhere. And so by creating these, for us, what we find is by creating these dashboards that have an organizational hierarchy, sort of not only can the CEO see how they're doing for compliance, but the CEO can then forward that dashboard onto his sales team or to his marketing team or his HR team. And the heads of HR or sales and marketing can then look at their own organization and see how they're doing across key compliance metrics and so on and so forth. And so as you're able to kind of give that reporting out to the entire organization in, again, easy, digestible dashboards, they can start enacting those changes that they need to kind of drive compliance forward.
Well, you've talked about compliance a couple times here, Robin. What are some ways to enhance compliance reporting and really demonstrate cybersecurity's business value?
Yeah, and so I think one of the things I think we think about a lot and sort of like to sort of help our clients is with like outcome-driven metrics. And so really working with the business on what key SLAs are, as in, if you think about, it's not just sort of compliance for compliance sake, but things like ransomware. So having a set of mutually agreed upon service level agreements with the organization that if a ransomware attack should happen, that we either have coverage on X% of key critical systems, or we can get those systems back up and running within sort of X amount of hours. And so by framing it up that way, and instead of sort of, again, adhering to sort of bunch of facts and stats, but like really tying it to clear business outcomes, you can really prove the value of your cybersecurity programs and your compliance programs. And so it becomes less about, how many patches have we done? How many fixes have we done that don't really mean that much to some of the senior level folks at an organization? You can really sort of put it into clear business terms, like if a ransomware happens, we have 80% of our essential systems covered. And we can get things back up online in about 12 hours, right? And that can really show the business value. And then you can kind of have more sophisticated discussions, because if your CEO wants to say like, well, okay, 12 hours isn't acceptable. That's a whole day of business. Can we do it in 6 hours? Then you can have a discussion about what it would take to go from 12 to 6. Or if they're like, you know what, it's fine. We can let the business, we can give everybody a day off if we get hit by ransomware and like, start the next day, then they can discuss sort of what, 18 hours. So you can really sort of drive those business discussions instead of sort of slightly more esoteric discussions about, systems fixed and vulnerabilities found.
Robin, I want to circle back to the how. Here's an opportunity to dive into some detail on how you approach these challenges.
Yeah. So, I think we talked a little about entity resolution, but for us, that is where the magic happens. That's the real secret sauce. And so if I think about a person in an organization like myself, I might have 3 attributes. I might have an email address, I might have an employee ID, I might have a Windows NT login. And I'm going to do a bunch of different things in a bunch of different systems in each of these 3 pieces of identification. But sort of the real art is sort of tying that all together into a coherent whole. And so with entity resolution, that's what we do, is we don't just look at, Robin as an email address or Robin as an employee ID or Robin as an NT login. We sort of have this notion of, Robin's going to have all 3 of these attributes. What systems is he interacting in? Where have we seen this NT login before? And so what it does is it starts to pull this together. It stitches this all together into a nice kind of ongoing timeline about me as an entity with all the different things I've interacted in. So for us, I think that's like sort of a really sort of interesting piece of it. And then sort of beyond that, there's not only sort of the entities that we know of or the things that interact is we sort of look for similar patterns, and we sort of have like an entity correlator that's able to like, triangulate across these different fields to kind of start pulling together this whole. And then from there, it goes into storage. So that's the next piece that we find that's interesting for us is we're not trying to lock you into our proprietary storage platform. Your data, we believe very strongly that your data is your data. And so what we do is, if you think about the stages of what we do is we've sort of ingested it, we've transformed the data, we've streamed that data, and then we stream that into a data lake that's on the customer side. So we can work with sort of the standard data lakes, like think of a Databricks or a Snowflake, or we can also leverage sort of cheaper versions of storage like sort of an S3 bucket or Azure Blob. And so then once we've kind of created this sort of pristine, standardized, sort of normalized data lake, you can then sort of use it to sort of drive a lot of different outcomes.
I want to ask you to share some insights now. One, share some practical methods for enabling continuous controls monitoring and prioritize remediation, things we tell organizations always that they need.
Yeah, and so sort of building off of this idea, one of the things that we find most useful for our clients is the compliance outcome. And so as we're sort of streaming that data all in real time, sort of normalizing it and placing it in this kind of ongoing timeline, that's kind of almost like step one to this continuous controls monitoring piece is like being able to continuously monitor all your controls, right? And so as we're pulling all this data in, for us, that's kind of how we enable our continuous controls monitoring for organizations. So it means they can kind of get an up to the minute sort of, always on view of their compliance and their compliance posture. And so I think that's where we really sort of see our sweet spot. I mean, once it's kind of coming in, you can also use it for security threats. You can even sort of get onto the first couple of stages of AI. But for where a lot of our clients they see the most resonances with sort of compliance. And once you sort of have all this data coming in, it can also sort of help, augment your existing systems of record, like a CMDB. And so thinking about vulnerability asset exposure management, the first step to that is like you can't protect what you don't know you have, right? And so if your CMDB is sort of a little bit out of date, as any system of record is, by us sort of streaming in all that data, having that entity resolution piece, we can really help our clients kind of close that gap of unmanaged devices. As a sort of practical example, if we sort of see a user logging into a particular device, and we've seen that user, and we sort of know what that username is, we can kind of help organizations kind of assign that ownership to these different devices. And so that's kind of one really, really sort of simple way we can kind of help our customers sort of move quickly on a compliance journey.
Rob, I always double down on prioritize remediation. My understanding is you don't offer just a single pane of glass. It is a static pane of glass. Talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, a great point. So a lot of when it comes to sort of vulnerability remediation, a lot of tools just sort of reporting out the state as is. What we like to try and do is enable our users. Not only do we suggest potential owners for the tools that are unknown, we also enable sort of the user of our platform to kind of make active changes. And so we'll suggest a potential owner, and then if the sort of and then if the client agrees, they can then sort of simple sort of hit a button, update the changes. It flows through into the CMDB. Even more fun, we have a AI agent called Beekeeper that not only looks at the potential owners, it will then proactively reach out via Teams to sort of interact with the potential owner and ask them simple questions about if they are in fact the owner of the asset or not. And then if the customer, within the organization says, yes, that is my asset, we'll sort of go off and update the CMDB. If the customer says, no, this isn't my asset, Beekeeper will then say thank you and then on to the next potential owner. And so that way we can kind of really help our clients, sort of take some of that pain out of kind of always finding the owners, because we know the first rule of sort of any vulnerability management is you got to be able to kind of reach the owner to kind of make the change, right? That's step number one. And so by sort of making sure we always have like this ever-ready, evergreen, sort of up-to-the-minute list of owners and assets, it can really sort of help speed those SLAs to kind of closing those vulnerability gaps.
Rob, I'm going to ask you to share some other instances, please. Talk about some real world use cases for aligning cybersecurity, GRC, and executive objectives. No small order.
Yeah, really something simple like that. Yeah, I mean, I think sort of again, it all begins with the data and that single source of truth. And so the first challenge is when you think about compliance, sometimes you're reporting out on metrics that might be a little bit embarrassing, or if somebody's failed an audit, if you can start to poke holes in the data, you're going to spend more time sort of questioning the audit results than improving the audit results. So I think that's the first thing, is by providing organizations with this gold standard sort of in data, we really sort of help organizations spend less time arguing about numerators and denominators and like sort of why we failed the audit. Well, your data's wrong, you're not putting it from the right spot. So I think that's a real sort of important piece that's sometimes like overlooked with that compliance journey, is if people don't trust the data, then they're not going to agree with the audit. And one of the things we do is we make everything very traceable. We don't believe in black boxes. So within the UI of our tool, if ever there's a metric you don't sort of fully understand, you can sort of go into the UI and you can kind of see exactly how we're pulling the data, what sources we're using, what transformations we're making. So I think that's the first step, is having that foundational layer. And then the second step, I think, for us is that we're aligned to business data as well as security data. And so again, we're really focused on trying to make compliance a team sport across the enterprise. So by putting in an organizational hierarchy, it means that you can see how you perform against your peers. So there's no greater incentive than seeing if the East Division is not doing as well as the West Division, or the West Division is doing better than the North Division. And then secondly, not only can you see how you're doing compared to your peers, your boss can see how you're doing compared to your peers, which is also a really big incentive to help people drive change. Because obviously, if people have transparency and insight into how the metrics are progressing, people can ask those right questions and they can help drive compliance as well. And what we find is really the people that can help drive compliance are sort of the local managers versus like the unnamed auditors in an airless conference room.
Well said. Robin, we started this conversation talking about the challenge that Comcast had. How has DataBee helped Comcast address that challenge, and what results have you seen beyond becoming a spin-off company of your own?
And so I mean, I think the challenges we've been able to sort of help, again, provide that transparency, that accountability, sort of across our sort of audit teams, and so they can kind of really again become more like business partners with the business, and sort of help the business sort of drive their business objectives versus being the department of no, or again sort of not pointing fingers and stuff like that. It's really sort of enabled compliance to become a team sport here at Comcast, and really sort of elevated the role of the BISO into a true business partner versus, again, somebody to just sort of take score from the sidelines and become the department of no. And one other thing that sort of it's enabled, our CISO always sort of talks about being able to ask those audacious questions. And so, sometimes either she would pose sort of what maybe seemed like a very simple question, or the board would pose what seemed like a very simple question. And it would always take sort of, weeks to kind of come up with an answer, as sort of the various analysts were having to pivot and stitch together things and live in an Excel. So one of the things that we've really been able to is not only can you answer the simple questions, you can answer the audacious questions. As we have all this data here, it means that those seemingly simple questions that the board asks can sort of just be provided at in minutes, right, versus weeks. And then also it enables your SLT and your CEO to ask sort of the really audacious questions, and so by that, you're sort of limited by the art of the possible, not just kind of what lives in spreadsheets.
What do you hear from your customers? What do they come back to you and tell you that you've been able to help them do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that our customers sort of like is that flexibility with frameworks. And so, when you think about compliance, even though the metrics might sound very simple, being able to implement them at scale in a big enterprise is often very complicated. So, I mean, I think the first thing is we're sort of running on AWS, so we have the ability to scale up and down quite easily. And so we're never sort of intimidated by a large amount of data. And then we talked about earlier, we have sort of all the connectors, and we haven't met a connector that we don't like yet. And so, I think that's the first thing that we're sort of hearing from our customers. They like sort of the fact that we can kind of scale both horizontally and sort of vertically, to kind of both account for the massive amounts of data and the variability in their data. The second thing, again, it almost sounds like basic stuff, but I think they like the transparency, the quality control, the documentation. So again, no black boxes. And so, when we work with our customers, we sort of provide them with all that. And so they sort of understand what we're doing to their data, and it is still their data, and we sort of give it back to them. And then I think they also, like the fact that they don't just get what's on the truck today, they kind of get what's on the truck tomorrow. We, as being sort of part of Comcast, have to be very aware of regulations, where regulations are moving to. And we've really found that, again, having this data in the security data fabric enables you to be very, very flexible when it does come to compliance, because the regulations are always changing. The interesting piece of this is, even though regulations are always changing, the sort of underlying data sets that they use to show evidence of those sort of adherence to the compliance doesn't really change that much, right? So I think that's really sort of an interesting point, is as we've sort of got that data in, we can be very, very flexible with our partners as to sort of helping them report out. We're not trying to help them misreport something, but what we're trying to do is report out accurately sort of how compliant they are. A really easy example is like endpoint detection and response. So a lot of customers, for different frameworks, need to report out sort of how deployed, how widely deployed do they have endpoint detection and response. Sounds really simple. You would just take, the number of endpoint detection and response tools, I mean, sort of like licenses divided by the number of assets, done. Sounds easy. However, in reality, what you find is that's a little bit more complex, because they might have more than one different sort of EDR tool, right? In different business units, they might have gone with different decisions. And then, that's on the numerator side. Then on the denominator side, they might have different notions of assets. And so, should you count something that could never support an EDR tool, like a network switch? Well, no. And so, even though the EDR tools themselves might have their own dashboards, it's only when you sort of combine all that data together, and then you understand the puts and the takes on the top side of the numerator and and on the bottom side of the denominator, that you can kind of really get an accurate view of how widely your EDR tool is covered. And so I think our customers really enjoy that type of flexibility, and sort of ability to kind of really, meet the customer where they are with the nuances of their business in implementing some of these frameworks.
Speaking of which, I don't see you even blink at the notion of dealing with AI and the amount of data that creates for all your customers.
Yeah. Again, it comes back to that sort of scalability. We were proven within Comcast, so we have that sort of Comcast scale sort of embedded in our DNA. So we know really how to scale up the business. We've also been at the bleeding edge in AI, for a long period of time. And so we sort of have a lot of in-house expertise when it comes to AI. And so, as you think about sort of where the future holds, more and more sort of logs and compliance is going to sort of be focused on AI. We have the systems and the tools set up to sort of handle that volume of data. So, we think it will be relatively straightforward to sort of, fulfill the needs of our customer with whatever sort of needs they sort of throw at us, really.
Well, at the same time, every customer comes with a degree of technology debt, a degree of legacy technology, corporate silos of their own. What I'm hearing from you is you meet them where they are and take them to a new level.
Yeah, and so the technology debt, I mean, oftentimes it's I think oftentimes what you'll find is they're moving towards a unified roadmap or moving to get off tool A, and tool B because tool C is the chosen one forward. The trouble is like caring for that while you kind of get there can be challenging. And so again, by us sort of adhering to the OCSF, right, a sort of a third-party standard, we take all the data from all, tool A, B, and C, put it into a common sort of data format. So while they're sort of migrating off of tool A into tool C, they sort of know what the data looks like. And in some ways, it can kind of make their lives easier because we begin to abstract away the data produced by the tools, and you just kind of have like this sort of, higher level view of all the tools on the same, speaking the same language.
Robin, this conversation is going to continue. In our next session, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into continuous compliance and risk management. Give us a preview of some of what we might uncover there.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll sort of maybe dive a little bit deeper into sort of some key use cases with compliance and some compliance outcomes. We can talk more about sort of the frameworks and sort of the implementation of the frameworks and how having a security data fabric really enables you to be very flexible. And as we know, regulations will sort of be changing. How, by having all the data, it can really enable you to sort of stay abreast of the changes that are coming in regulation, as well as always understanding sort of to the last, few minutes how your posture is. And so we can kind of maybe talk a bit more about some of the implementations of a security data fabric and how it can really, really help sort of foster a better sort of feeling of compliance sort of across the organization.
Excellent. Robin, the goal of this session was to demystify the security data fabric. If there was one, maybe two messages you want to leave with our attendees today to take away, what would they be?
Yeah. So I think message number one is I think of a security data fabric as being sort of the foundational layer for achieving better compliance outcomes at an organization, especially at scale. And thinking about scale, sort of we I think have proven our ability to operate at scale. We're sort of providing, we sort of ease the burden, I think, for our enterprise clients by sort of working on all the documentation, but sort of let us sort of perform the quality control on your data pipelining, sort of and stitching together that data. You sort of get access to our sort of DNA of innovation. As sort of you buy like not just what's on the truck today, buy what's on the truck tomorrow. So we're constantly trying to expand our capabilities. I think we touched upon for compliance for AI, sort of, our beekeeper sort of functionality. And then, for any customer that's sort of thinking about this, we have sort of a robust professional services offering. And so we can like really help our customer, with their needs and help them sort of really implement sort of their frameworks sort of in their way that kind of represent them in the best manner. And really sort of want to kind of act as a partner with our customers and sort of really help them achieve the compliance outcomes they're sort of looking for.
Well said. Thank you. As always, Robin, I appreciate our conversations. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thanks so much, Tom.
I want to thank our attendees as well. We know you took time out of your day to attend this session. We're grateful for that. Look forward to having you back for our next session and for others as well. As always, for Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you for giving us your time and your attention.